Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Grant Cameron, and I have a super special guest today. I appreciate you taking valuable time from your life to join us. I do a lot of interviews, and interviewers can get to interview various types of people, but it's very rare that you get to interview somebody who is considered to be uh, perhaps the top person in the field in the world. And today we're going to talk about physical mediumship. I have really gotten into this. I have a UFO background, but in the last little while, people who know me know that I've been pushing physical mediumship as sort of the Super Bowl of all paranormal phenomena. And it basically comes down to the idea of if you can solve the problem of what happens at death, you solve all the paranormal mysteries. So today I have one of the top physical, perhaps the top physical medium in the world, Kai Muegge here. And his wife, Julia, is also joining us here, and they're coming in from Germany. And I also have a good friend of mine who actually is sort of my mentor in this field, Walter Rucker from the United States. And Walter actually sort of got me going down this path. And I didn't realize he had the extensive knowledge that he has in this field. For example, he has perhaps the biggest private collection of Leslie Flint tapes. And if you don't know who Leslie Flint is in terms of mediumship, I think you've sort of fallen out of the boat, and you may be at a point of drowning, because that's a key guy. And Walter also had a vast collection of material on Bashar, and he's provided me books on various subjects where he seems to have the book. So I know when anybody's got a collection that big and knows as much as Walter does, you got to listen to him. And he's the one that sort of got me talking about actual seances, because I was talking about the phenomena, and he said, why don't you talk to somebody who's actually been in one of these things? And so he and Kevin Lee sort of joined up with me. And I also appreciate Walter for helping me out with the DNA experiment. We may talk about it a little bit today, an experiment that I think that if it works will basically the world will flip upside down for a couple of seconds while people try to figure out what the heck happened. So welcome, Walter, and welcome, Kai and Julia. And I appreciate your spending your time to update me on this very, very important subject, which I have a lot of questions on.
Thank you, Grant.
Thank you so very much, dear Grant.
Beautiful.
You're welcome. Love to be
Okay, maybe we can start a little bit about the background, because I've listened to a number of your interviews, Kai, and I was very impressed at the fact that you have this unbelievable background in knowing everything about physical mediumship, where all the people, how it started. And so can you go through a little bit about setting up for people who may not know the importance of physical mediumship? What's physical mediumship? What's mental mediumship? What's psychic channeling? How do all these things differ? And I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, physical mediumship is sort of the hardest. There's only maybe a handful of people in the world who actually do this and travel around.
There are a lot more people who are doing it. There are so many. There are uncountable experimental groups everywhere around the world. Alone, the groups we have motivated to be formed are more than at least 24 all around the world, and we are standing in contact with a lot of these groups, of course not with all. Alone in England, we probably have uncountable physical experimental groups. So the difference is that I am doing this since I'm 15 years of age. I'm holding seances since I'm 15 years of age. I'm now 52. So I have a huge experience and experimental background. And we have fastened and secured specific activities in this regards, which are coming up when you're coming in a ceremonial environment with a positive and an interested group, and you are reaching out for the manifestative forms of spirituality, then we actually can trigger them together with people. And most of the people who might be able to realize that, to make it happen, are not interested in doing it in any way or form publicly because of the ridicule, because of the probable fraud allegation that may come up, which is usual. Skeptics usually react on these forms of manifestations within spirituality, even though it is a history that began with the dawn of man. Since the beginning of mankind, the supernatural was manifesting around the human being, and the history of the supernatural, actually, it's the history of its manifestations around the human being. And very, very early, the human being started to find and form experimental and ceremonial environments in which the human being wanted to proactively reach out to that obvious presence of a subtle supernatural world. And like Burkhard Heim is saying, over the time, these environments became more and more predestined for a breakthrough from a hyperspace environment, the moment when a supernatural phenomenon is happening. Burkhard Heim, with his 6th and 12th dimensional theory about the world, is believing that the ceremonial environment is one of these specific environments when supernatural phenomena can happen. And we have not only implemented and facilitated that idea in our work, but a lot of others as well, to actually create a very followable, logical background for what we are doing. And I hope to be in the position to very soon share it with you. But as you may find out, we have quite a rational approach to it. And yeah, and so there was then 2000 years of church interconnections, and the church was investigating these physical phenomena, these physical manifestations, of course, because the church was always looking for an area where religious, where God was showing himself or herself in between us human beings, or in between our realms of life. And then 1848 actually, in the Western Hemisphere, in Rochester, in the state of New York, there was another one of these manifestations in the house of the family Fox. These were massive raps phenomena, loud knocking, so loud that for several days crowds of people were standing in front of the house and looking what was going on. The fireworkers, all the handicraftsmen, everybody was in the house and had tried to find out what was responsible for these knocks. And finally, after 8 weeks, after 2 months, the 3 sisters, 1848, that was, the 3 sisters had the idea to knock back. And that was the start of the exploration, the finding out that there was a kind of intelligent knocking was going on. And the knocking identified itself as a deceased beggar who once had asked for something to eat at the door of the house when a former tenant was living in the house. And there was a dispute going on. The former tenant had seemingly killed this beggar and digged him into the cellar, and the knockings claimed to be the soul of that beggar that wants to have a decent burial. And in the moment they had found out that, they went into the cellar and digged and found actually bones. It is not so very much clear if these were truly human bones, but they found bones. And the press, and that made it actually happening. There was a massive press coverage going on and covering this story massively. And that was at a time when actually the American society was prepared for a foretold new spiritual wave that was foretold by people like Davies and Swedenborg since the midst of the 18th century. A new Western spiritual movement was foretold. And maybe that was the reason that the press was so present with that case, because there were a lot of amazing cases going on at that time. We have poltergeist cases going on with talking entities that were talking loudly and such things. But these cases have not found a coverage like this 1848 family Fox thing. Mm-hmm. And for the press, that was a round story. First, they had the mystery of the knocks for 8 weeks. Then the sisters found out that there was a spirit communicating. The spirit of a deceased person was communicating. And for the press, the circle was closed the moment they found out that there was allegedly somebody digged in the cellar. But in reality, and not many people do know that actually, in reality, the knocks did not stop in the house of the family Fox. In the contrary, they were even more active and even louder than before. This time, not a beggar was anymore communicating via these knocks. This time, higher spirits addressed the three sisters and claimed that the three sisters would be the spearhead of a new movement, and that it is the exact right time to leave the house now and to travel the United States and the world in the end, to tell the people about the actuality of spirit communication in a contemporary Western Hemisphere environment. And that was actually the case. That was the marker for the start of what is usually be referred to modern spiritism or modern spiritualism. By the way, the difference between these two words is Spiritism is the contemporary Western Hemisphere's tradition of spirit communication, basically, and spiritualism is when religious approaches are involved here. So in England, they are referring to spiritualism because they made out of that spirit communication tradition an alternative religion, a publicly accepted alternative religion. You have in the UK thousands of spiritualistic churches. That is quite interesting. It's, by the way, the only European country in which that is the case. So 2 years after 1848, so 1850, all three sisters were traveling the United States, working as professional mediums. And that was the start. And very, very quickly, hundreds, thousands, and in the end, 10,000s. I have no actual numbers about how many mediums are working in the United States, but the amount of people who were trying themselves out in that regards was actually not overseeable. We believe that nearly every family, sooner or later in that times, tried at least once, if in the own family is also somebody who might have the connection. And what then happened, only as a last sentence, what then happened was they came together in the kitchens. Many of them were very poor. They mostly kitchen was the main room to come together, and they sat around the kitchen's table, and they were awaiting raps amongst some other things, but mainly raps. So everybody was putting their hands on the table, that nobody was playing tricks or making jokes with with knockings and raps in that regard. So everybody had their hands on the table, and then they were calling out for the spirits. And what then does happen until today, we all know. And that was the start of the involvement of that furniture thing, that when you see an image, people sitting around the table having their hands on it, you know immediately Spiritism or spiritualism. And so it came. And yeah, and then in the following, a very, very interesting development happened. And there are relations to the Northern American Indian spirit culture and spirit ceremonies, very much influencing the early movement. Trance, the term trance played a role, even though hypnosis was not even discovered. And actually, we don't know really what the people were referring to when they were talking about trance. And that was a time when the most strongest manifestations happened around the medium. And some went along that way, and in Europe at least, a very experimental approach, facilitated and led by the Germans, was going to be lost through Second World War and the Nazis. And after the Germans had lost their influence in regards to have a free experimental approach towards the repertoire mediums were having, and mediums were having usually a wide repertoire, and usually many mediums had forms of physical phenomena in their repertoire, but a doctrine and a dogma was very more often brought forward, and that was the doctrine or dogma that mediumistic effort was only evaluated when there is the try to prove the survival of the personality after death. So not the proof of the survival of consciousness, the proof of the survival of the personality. And this is one of the questions within spiritualism that was never questioned, and that has to be questioned massively, specifically when we look into what Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, and all these things teach us. It's exactly the contrary. And these things have never been questioned within spiritualism, and we spiritists question it. And it's quite an interesting area, I can tell you, Grant. And it's amazing you are with us now on this premises, because it is really an amazing thing to explore and to experience. So welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You mentioned, or maybe just to clarify, so there's mediums, and sometimes people will think, well, they're people who are sort of relay channeling, they're sort of passing messages back and forth, but your type of physical mediumship is a little bit different. You're actually in a trance where you're not there, correct?
Yes, indeed. We have a technique developed that makes it possible to fully step out of the way. We are teaching that method on our workshop, and in our workshops, of course, it takes a little bit of time to actually facilitate it fully, to achieve it in its full extent. But the way to reach that state and level of altered state of consciousness is clearly defined, and it's a logical way. So it's a classical deep trance, what you are referring to when you are talking about a mediumistic trance, because trance, when we look for the definition of trance, it simply means altered state of consciousness. And following this definition, we all are several times a day in trance. When we are driving and shifting the gear without thinking about it, we are in trance. When we are singing under the shower, we are in trance. When we are doing sports, we are in trance. When we are doing sex, we are in trance, and so forth. But there is a form of mediumistic trance in which a spirit overtakes a body to different degrees and speaks and have all its mannerisms at best through another body, the body of the medium. And that's the classical and the most adored and the most wanted form of trance achievable in that regards. And we, insofar, match that definition. Yes, that's true.
Can I ask, you say you can teach this? Can you teach this to anybody, or do you have to have sort of an ability to be sort of like a medium? And the second question is, your spirit controller, whatever you want to call him, is Hans Bender. Can you describe how that started and who he is and why that's important?
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. First of all, we believe that talking to the spirits is an archetypical form of communication. When we look when we look at it from an anthropological approach, then we have anthropologists who claim that this tradition is 10,000 years old. Other anthropologists claim this tradition of spirit communication is 20,000 years old. There are even anthropologists who claim that spirit communication already happened in the Neanderthal, that already the early or the more primitive form of the human being had an idea of a subtle reality, which by the way we humans always were perceiving. We always believe to perceive that there is an unseen world existing besides our visible world, and not only that we perceive that it is there. No, there was an additional perception, namely the perception that we are believing that there is an interconnection. So it is not only there, but additionally we are interconnected with that unseen realm. And so this is accompanying the human being from the beginning on, and we very much believe so that it is in the normal range of the human ability to alter consciousness into specific grades. And so we have not that little bit colonial approach that only specific people are gifted, or this is a God-given gift or ability only some chosen people can exercise. No, in the contrary, we believe exactly the opposite, and we have seen it so many times that, and we know it from ESP, by the way. We have a lot of proof that more or less everybody can, with any with no special condition, is capable to do remote viewing and to have predictive dreams or such things. So no, we believe everybody can do that. We believe there is a specific dynamic involved in regards to a group involvement, specifically in ceremonial approaches. We are referring to what is called in the Western Hemisphere seances. In an indigenous environment, it would be called ceremony, spirit ceremony. It is when a group of people come together with specific expectations and with a specific mindset and a specific will and a specific readiness to let things happen, to let things go, and together with somebody who is leading that, these things can be triggered with psychotechniques and group dynamics, specific group dynamics involved. Parapsychology is explaining that it is more or less the same model which parapsychology is using to explain what is going on at the Ouija board when people come together at the Ouija board, or when people come together around the table, and how the expectation to reach out into the supernatural, and how the systemic of the group, together with the expectation to reach out into subtle realms, supernatural realms, together with the readiness to do it, and together with the created ceremonial environment that is defined, that has to be clearly defined. This mixture of systemics is creating what parapsychology is referring to a meta system that is overtaking then, so to speak, the control over the movements of the table. And when you carry on to work with such meta systems, the phenomena become more complex, and specifically when you enhance your thinking about spirits and the afterlife, which has to be discussed very much, which ideas are out there about the here and now and an afterlife. And this is quite an easy, quite a simple approach. It may help from time to time maybe to get things going, but we believe the reality looks a little bit more complex. So basically, excuse me, you have to when I lose the core of your question, please, you have to stop me.
Yeah. Okay. No. So you're talking about this, that anybody can be trained. You do the courses in Germany, and can you get into Hans Bender? How did he pop into your life? He wasn't there when you were 15 years old, correct?
Oh, no. Absolutely not. First of all, you need to know that we don't have the approach of the spiritualists, that there is any need or urge to prove that Hans Bender is who he claims to be. For us, a value of a spirit communicator has to be his ability to receive the group of sitters, that he has to have the ability to take all these sitters at their hands and accompany or lead them into something that may open their thinking, reconnects them with source energy, and give something to them that has value, spiritual value, that they come out of these sessions and believe, oh wow, I have experienced spirituality in a dimensional grade. I have experienced spirituality not before. So this is how we would like to define the quality of a spirit communicator. If that spirit communicator names himself Emperor of China or Hans Bender, plays absolutely no role. You know, we cannot even fathom personality in the here and now. I cannot fathom my personality actually. You cannot fathom my personality. I cannot fathom your personality. How could it ever be possible to fathom a personality that claims to come through a medium, speaks 3 or 4 sentences, or maybe 20 or 30? How can such a number of remarks, comments, or sentences of an alleged spirit ever be meaning that this is the full personality of the same person that had wandered on earth 30 years ago? That is not makeable. We won't be able to prove the afterlife through mediums. That won't be able. These spirits can. Hans Bender talked a lot about his past. He mentioned places, he mentioned names, he mentioned personal things, how students were referring to him. But come with Rupert Sheldrake and claim that this is coming from the morphogenetical field, and I have no reason, or I have no proof that it is not so. We cannot really say where these contents are coming from. We mediums, we facilitate it, believe it is coming from the outside. Maybe it is coming from the inside. Maybe at a certain point, the outside and the inside is very much the same.
Okay. Now, before we get, we're going to go, you're coming to the United States and I'm coming down from Canada. I want to watch this in Florida. But before we get to that, one of the things that always interested me with you is apportation phenomena, that you get a lot of this. Can you talk about what happens in some of your seance with apports? And can you talk about the biggest one that you had? I mean, you may have a bigger one, but I saw one story about a big one that you had appear. Can you talk a little bit, maybe define what apports are and how it happens around you? You have a lot of this stuff going on.
First of all, when you come from Canada, you shan't be coming to watch. You should be coming to participate.
Yes, I agree. I understand the principle. Yes.
Okay. All right. I know. Yes. You know, from the beginning on in our work, when I was, that was starting 2003, I just was taking part as I was not anymore employed. I worked 12 years for Vivendi Universal Interactive. Originally, we began as Sierra Cocktail and Blizzard, which was at that time a startup company for famous computer games, actually, at that time. And then we were being sold and refirmed. And they were going to Northern Ireland, and there was a bunch of people that were not wanting to go to Northern Ireland. And we formed a news company here. And that news company was actually called Babylon TV. And we ran over the Frankfurt area and produced news videos for news channels. That was a time, for the first time after 12 years, when I could arrange my times a little bit better. And I had at the same time the offer from my mother that in the big family house, I could use a room to form a new circle. That was the right time to form a new circle. I even had the idea, maybe I can do something with filming, because, as I said, my first circle started when I was 15. And all my circles, every single one of these circles had physical phenomena very, very naturally. And I thought, oh, wow, maybe I can do something with camera and physical phenomena and so forth. So the Felix Circle was formed in 2003 with family members and friends. For the first time, my mother, who is a teacher and who was always keeping herself a little bit in the distance in regards to what I was doing because of her name, of course. She could not in any way or form become involved in her son's occult activities. She became part of it when she was retired, and she was a founding member of the Felix Circle. And until today, she's probably one of the most enthusiastic. Unfortunately, she has become very ill, but from time to time, she is with us as it was years ago. Yeah, and so the Felix Circle was being formed, and with the Felix Circle, it was so interesting because at the beginning we had these amazing apports of handwritings of the deceased. The whole apport story started actually with handwritings of the deceased that came in wax balls that were simply flying into the group that was sitting around the table, or it was appearing in the clinched hands of sitters, like, for example, the famous Albert Hoffmann report that appeared in the clinched hand of Basel's Psi Association president Lucius Wertmüller, and who was beholding a personal message to Lucius Wertmüller in the handwriting of Albert Hoffmann, and the handwriting was then by Professor Alex Schneider and by the children of Albert Hoffmann identified, and specifically what was being written was very obviously the tone and the right choose of words. Albert Hoffmann, the inventor of LSD, a friend of Lucius Wertmüller, would have said from the afterlife realm to Lucius. So that was one of the very early parts. We had graphological expertises about. We had another graphological expertise financed by a Danish newspaper. It was the handwritten remark or sentence from the famous Danish full materialization medium Einar Nielsen to the Danish medium and researcher and publisher Marion Dampier Jeans. And Einar Nielsen was not only writing in his proven handwriting, he also used the grammar of Denmark of the 1950s when he was living. And so forth. And, you know, we had much more of these handwritten messages than we actually did write about, or people financed graphological expertise, like with the Hans Negli apport, that not only, and that is so absolutely amazing, you should have a look in our English blog at it, Grant, because it is so obvious. 25 years after his death, in my seance, a prescription sheet of the psychiatric practice of the president of the Switzerland Psychiatric Association, and at the same time president of the Switzerland Paranormal or Parapsychological Association, Professor Dr. Hans Negli Osjord. His prescription sheet, one paper from his practice somewhere in Switzerland 25 years after his death, materialized in materialized in our seance, and unquestionably in his handwriting. He writes something and addresses me directly, calling me by name. And this is so unbelievable and crazy, but also in the same time exciting and amazing, of course. 25 years after his death, his handwriting unquestionably is writing my name on a former prescription sheet, which for a long time should not exist anymore, 25 years after his death. And he was writing seemingly, or it seemed so, as if he was writing to me that from the afterlife realm, let's call it that way, he would be supporting me in my efforts to do materialization, mediumship, and telekinesis, psychokinesis, mediumship. He would be supporting me, and very formally this writing was. And yeah, and with these amazing things, the apportation phenomena happened. This prescription sheet also came in a wax ball. At that day, three wax balls were landing. By the way, the Albert Hoffmann apport also had an amazing symbol in it, but you can. The story is too long. You can. It's about. Yes.
Well, yeah, we'll link it, but
Oh,
let's go
yes.
to the big one, because you're famous for the films I've seen is, where you have them coming out your eyes and stuff. You're not conscious of this kind of stuff going on, correct?
Oh, no. I'm not conscious. If I would be conscious, I believe probably my eyes would massively react onto these ongoings, because these objects are very, very pinpointed and very, very sharp. And we all know we only have to have a grain of sand in the eye.
Yeah.
And what then happens? The eye waters, the eye reddens. And here come really amazingly sharp objects from the eyes in mass. So no, I'm not conscious. I'm very, very, very in the background. Sometimes coming from that trance, sometimes there are memories and images of red rooms because of the red light in the seance room.
Yeah.
But I could never say, what was that this seance? Was that another seance? So something amazing in that trance really happens for up to 2, up to 3 hours. Something speaks out of me. I believe what is not a part of me. And meanwhile, this not part of me is talking through me. A bunch of phenomena happen. The voice claims that speaks through me that it is triggering these phenomena, triggering them from its different location this spirit has, the owner of this voice has. He says he is triggering these phenomena actually to make the sitters listen to what he is saying. None of these phenomena are coming simply to be demonstrated. They are always coming with a humanitarian message, let's say, with a new age message, let's say. Mm-hmm. It's about booking people in, actually. It's a little bit like he wants to bring in people in what he refers to as a cosmological a joint venture, so to speak, and he then materializes objects for the people to give that message a physical representation and to give it the people home. And every time they have the objects in their hand, they can remember, oh yes, there was that spirit that wanted to realign me with this global movement or towards a paradigm shift. And so the spirits materialize these objects to give it to the people.
Beautiful. Desta, can you put the photograph up now? And maybe Walter, you can sort of take over and talk with Kai about what's going to happen in Florida. This is in June in Florida. And this is the room that's going to be used. So can you explain for people, and Walter and Kai just talk about what's going to happen? And I was sort of warned that one of your sessions went 5.5 hours. So I said, I'm going to make sure I don't drink water that day, but you have very long sessions. So maybe Walter, between Walter and Kai, can you talk about what is actually going to happen? And this is the room that's
Granted will fly by like as it is a minute.
Okay.
That's true. That's true.
Go ahead.
That looks like a familiar room, doesn't it, Kai?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We just been here last year as well, and this is more or less our regular environment for our cabinet or deep trance sessions.
You'll notice that there are no wheels on the chairs, and this is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Kevin Lee's seance room. And but typically when we sit with Warren or some of the other mediums that come in, we'll have the nice comfy chairs with the wheels on them and whatnot. I think that your spirit control demands that these non-movable chairs be used. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Indeed, indeed.
And is there a particular reason for that?
Yes. We want to avoid that the people can glide around with their chairs and can enlarge by will the circle. You know, we always have the discrepancy. We have imagine there is truly a portal erecting in the midst of the room. This portal has a capacity, a spatial capacity. And the bigger the circle is, this capacity is being lowered in regards to its ability to reach out to the people. The closer they sit, the more complex their experience will be with what is coming through that portal.
I noticed that you have what looks like, is that a wooden platform right in front of the cabinet?
Yeah, as you know, during every phenomenal part of the evening, we are not sitting in the cabinet. We are being held from left and right at arms and legs. And in between, the control persons do not only check the medium, but check themselves and their opposite control as well. So there are 3 knotted people around that chair in the midst that shall guarantee that the medium is not standing up in the dark and is somehow transfiguring, we would be calling it in spiritistic terms. Transfiguring would mean that the medium through his body is expressing the will of the spirits which are involved. And besides Hans Bender, there are a lot more spirits, of course, involved. So from in the history of spiritualism, we have that regularly. Helen Duncan was regularly seen freed from her binds, because in English traditional spiritualism, mediums are being bound to their chairs and then being let alone inside of the cabinet. The lights are being closed, at least during the initial stages of the seance. And it's always hard for the people sometimes not to think that the medium somehow became freed and is doing it by itself. And to avoid that from the start, we are following the German approach, and the German approach very early from the 1903, 1904, Schrenk or Grunewald or Geley with Rudi Schneider and with they were always only holding the mediums. They said, there are phenomena in the room. We want to know what the medium is doing in exactly that moment when the phenomena is happening in the room. And it is quite an amazing pool of data, of course, because would we let the medium simply be alone in the cabinet, we would lose that data. What happens with the medium when these phenomena are going on? Is the medium anyhow involved in a parallel clinching of the body, or is he sweating? Is he trembling? Is he maybe doing parallel movements, which we know from Eusapia Palladino? She was regularly doing so-called sympathetical movements. So according movements as if she would be somehow in contact with the objects 3 meters away. She wasn't in contact, but she was mimicking or gesturing, excuse me. She was gesturing as if she was. So, and that is quite interesting for the investigator who sits beside the medium to experience. No, the medium sits, in my case, all the time quiet and relaxed, leaned back into the chair, nearly not moving at all. Meanwhile, people claim to be touched, and the drum is being played, and you know what happens in the room. So the plate, this wooden plate, is for the moment when Julia is preparing another scenario with white light. Then and only then the medium is given free and is allowed to shield itself behind the cabinet curtains against the white light, and that the medium can easily glide or slide behind with a chair. We have implemented this wooden thing, but only in the first year. In the following years, we were not using it anymore.
Okay. Right in front of the chairs closest to us, there's something that's light blue, and is that a piece of tape that's on the floor there?
Yes, but not in this case, as you can see. The spirit wants to have a palpable borderline on the floor, which the spirit can use to make a contract with the sitters and say, there is that borderline on the floor. We can feel it with Kai's toes or with Kai's feet. We guarantee you that in the darkness phases, we won't overstep this borderline, not once. And therefore it is there. It is, so to speak, marking the area where the spirits have an exclusive space. And when the medium should enter this space, then the red light is on and it is announced, and everybody can see that the medium is entering this area, maybe to show something to a sitter. You know, these things have happened when he materialized this flower for the lady and so forth. Then he sometimes stands up, moves to a sitter, stands in front of the sitter, and does things for the specific sitter. But this is only then when this is announced and everybody can follow what is going on, because it is lights on.
Mm. Back there to the left of the cabinet, there are a number of items that during the seance will come active, that will float around the room, that will move without any, seemingly without any force being put upon them. And I've always wondered which combinations of ectoplasmic rods or arms and telekinesis and just spirit energy, which combinations of those create, especially the levitations?
The spirit would answer in the seance room. The reasons for the things that happen are not anymore related to one answer. They are not anymore one-dimensional, so to speak, because he claims that it is true that rods are involved, but it is true as well that there is a force field responsible for the flight of the cupboard trumpet, for example. So it's always the same. The moment we believe to have identified a specific technique of the spirits or a mechanic of the spirits, the moment we believe to have found that out, the next moment they prove to us that it's not the way we thought. So this is very hard to actually to determine. So sometimes we saw things and we felt things that would point into the direction of actually involved rods. This is a theory which is coming from a scientist from Dublin. His name is William J. Crawford. He did write 3 very influential books, methodological standard works actually for parapsychology. And he came up with the so-called rod and cantilever theory. And it's a theory about the involvement of ectoplasmic help structures that are being built by a spirit team in the room to help tables levitate, to let objects levitate, to move objects through the room, and so forth. Specifically, his third book, The Psychic Structures at the Gulliver Circle, is the one that has the most strongest evidence, photo evidence, and so forth for it. And I love the book. It's a classic. And even though I more tend to the power field theory in regards to the descriptions in which way the trumpet is flying, but the Spirit claims all of these theories are true.
Well, that threw me kind of as a curve there. I was hoping for a nice, simple answer. But is there any way that you can determine if one type of force field or an ectoplasmic rod is being used? Have you ever been able to say, I'm for sure that this...
We saw rods. We saw rods. We saw rods, and we have, for example, let me give you an example. We saw rods in red light in Hanau. Hanau, of course, is our strongest environment, and there were several seances in which he had a bunch of ectoplasm on my lap, and from my lap, at least a 2-meter rod was starting to form, and he was directing it from out of my lap, and people have made drawings from it. Then we have other observations. Many of these observations Julia is making, because she sits so close and she sometimes sees amazing things. So she believes to have seen rods move on the floor and on knee height and on chest height. She has seen structures operate in the very dim light. She's very trained to see things in the darkness or in very dimmed light. And she claims to have observed these rods being active in the room.
The cabinet is really nothing more than a black piece of cloth hung on a kind of like a shower curtain. And but it seems to be able to contain spiritual energy. Is that the primary use of the cabinet, as a container or an arranger, organizer of spiritual energy?
Yes, that's the theory coming from the annals of Spiritism and spiritualism, and this is how we work with it as well, basically as a psychic battery in the background of the room, which is only virtually separated from the energy of the humans, but alone this virtual separation, this thin cloth, seems to be enough to work. So we believe that works that way. We believe the spirits are compacting, are making things denser in the cabinet, are energizing the battery, so to speak. And then when the phenomena happen, they are nurtured from the cabinet.
Are you
Sometimes.
Are you getting any extraterrestrial presence in your seances?
Oh yes, we had from the beginning on. We had extraterrestrial communicators, and we even had a materialization of the extraterrestrial Ptah that was showing himself with his massive slender eyes. I don't know. Have you seen the image?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, describe that.
Wait, let me have a look. 1 second. Let me see if I can even show it to you. So there was a seance in Basel, and in the course of the seance, a gatekeeper, which is communicating from the beginning of the Felix circle, his name is Ta. He materialized, and he showed himself in the cabinet curtain, in the opening of the cabinet curtain. And let me quickly see if I can bring it up.
Would you get a red light picture?
Oh, yes.
And maybe you can get into what do you think the relationship between spirits and ETs? Where are ETs? Are they actually ETs, or where are they coming from?
Grant, we have been taught such a complex reality scheme by the spirits. Following the spirits, many of these extraterrestrial we encounter have a lot to do with ourselves, because our communicators claim that consciousness actually is multidimensional, and that we exist in the alleged past, which is actually not happening in the past, because time is an illusion of our perception. So what we believe is a past life is actually a life that is happening at that very moment in a parallel reality scheme. And the spirits claim that consciousness actually is projecting itself onto different planes of physical reality, actually to explore the physical universe. And different environments have made it necessary that different forms of entities, like the human beings or like sorts of extraterrestrials, had to be invented to survive in front of different environment backgrounds of planets. But basically, they are all coming from something the spirits refer to as the big oneness. And the spirits claim that the only true inhabitant of the universe, the only true species of the universe is not the Greys or the Pleiades or the humans or the elephants or the apes. The only true inhabitants, because these are all projections of consciousness, the only true inhabitant, the only true species is consciousness itself. And consciousness itself is exploring a physical universe which is extremely vast. And that's why it is throwing all these many seeds in very many different environments. But basically, we are all connected with them. Otherwise, we would not have them in our mind. Otherwise, we would not have them in our encounters. So actually, we are coming from a specific pool. And if we look at the most extraterrestrials which are described to us, like the Greys or the reptilians, they are all humanoid, obviously. They have 2 eyes, they have 2 ears, they have 2 arms. Yeah, this is obviously many different expressions from a basic scheme. For sure, there are other extraterrestrial forms of existence as well. But when we look into the UFO lore, let's say, we are usually encountering these more humanoid or clearly humanoid-looking entities, like the Nordic and all those. So they are in that oneness. We are all one of the same, and when my consciousness today is nurturing this personality here of mine, it may be that in that what I experience as past, this consciousness maybe has nurtured the life of an extraterrestrial entity. And we have tested that out in our private workshops. We are doing hypnotical transgressions, so no regressions into past lives, transgressions into parallel lives of existence. And we let the people hop via hypnosis into their parallel lives. And many of them end in extraterrestrial environments, which are so amazingly described in detail then, which is actually breathtaking. So it's the same like with the spirits. Many of the spirits we believe come from the outside, actually come from the inside. And we are very strong believers in the fact that many of the extraterrestrials we encounter actually come from the inside as well. In that regard, that we are by far not so different as we may believe. So there is this extraterrestrial connection going on, and it's important that we open our concepts in Spiritism, because extraterrestrials have played a part from very early on in Western Spiritism. It was the survivalists who formed a doctrine that keeps them out now since the 1950s, because when mediumship was once free and without doctrine, people were freely communicating with extraterrestrials from the Aldebaran, and were writing down the language from Mars, and were connected with entities from Uranus and so forth. So this was all restricted then. These contacts were not wanted anymore, because in many societies, in many spiritistic societies, the ego started to overtake, and the ego wanted to have its most basic fear being soothed and calmed down. And this most basic fear was the fear about what is when we are going to die. And then all these very naive, partially very naive ideas came up about a rainbow bridge and an afterlife that looks like our life here, and we can play spirit golf in the afternoon and drink spirit wine. Oh yes, oh yes.
Oh, yeah.
These ideas are promoted in the most influential spiritualistic publications, and the people jump onto it, and the people buy books into the millions, only to hear not only your consciousness survives, no, even your personality you have learned to love so very much will stay with you. You won't have to leave yourself. And that created a market of millions. And then it created even sub-markets. Let's regard the near-death experience market, which is manipulated as well, like these spiritualistic contents. The knowledgeable ones knows that near-death experiences are not only experiences of rainbow bridges and bliss. There are at least 30 up to 40% of near-death experiences people would not like to explore so very much in books and so forth, because they are really frightening and yes, leading us to a new discussion about what these images really are, which are offered to us from our brain or from our...
That's beautiful. And another question: if you can find the the photo of Ty. Maybe you can give it to us. Does he communicate with you? Is his message the same as you'd be getting from the spirits?
Yes, you need to understand that in a way, no matter who speaks, and it is mostly Hans who speaks for all, because they claim that the waste of energy is reasonless. Only to have another voice. I would love to have that. I would be a medium with these many voices, but I am not. Hans says everything. And when Ptah stands in the cabinet curtain, behind him, Hans is talking for him. And people look at that entity, and Hans is speaking, sitting behind him, and is expressing what Ptah is wanting or commenting or what. Yeah, the image.
Another question on this, and this relates to, is this screen image or what exactly is this? When whatever you have a manifestation, is it actually like a physical manifestation, like it would be physical, like a human being?
Please repeat, Grant.
The question is, like, if you have, say, Ta comes across, or you get a physical manifestation, if it touches a person, is this an actual, like, unmistakable, like a physical being that you couldn't tell the difference between whether it's a spirit or a human being? Is it really physical? My question is, like, when you come across, that they can come in and they can become physical in the physical world and then go back into whatever plane of existence they're in. Is that what, am I understanding it correct?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you believe. You can believe that the spirit is showing up because the spirit wants it. You can believe that the spirit is showing up because somebody is in the room who has a very strong connection, and this connection is somehow triggering the reproduction of the look of the loved one, deceased loved one. So we have these materialized personalities. One time, in a huge mass of ectoplasm, suddenly the entity starts to work with his fingers and opens a section, and then people are invited to come to the cabinet and look into that hole. And in that hole, suddenly, out of the white ectoplasm, very distinctive pictures of people become visible, even with living features. So people even believe or described or reported that they saw so very much highly defined features in that small images. Sometimes they are so big, but usually they are quite small, but well visible. This is the one form they appear.
Yeah.
And the other form they appear is when they take a full form. But this is a very exhaustive night and technique. And
yeah, because what happens is you hear lots of times people who claim to have been on the ship, and suddenly the beings will get their dead dog to appear or a dead relative. And you have this sort of crossover connection where on the other side, they're reporting this as well.
so I'm not sure if I have understood your question rightly, but
well, you'll get a lot of people in abduction type experiences. They'll claim they were on board the ship, and that
the spaceship.
Yeah, their dead relative or their dead dog will appear, and they get very upset. Like, why are you bringing these? This is not true. This could not be my dog. And they'll say it's like it's as real as real. And so there's this connection, which I'm looking at is the connection between the spirit world and the ET world, which I think you sort of defined, I think accurately, is that there is this, it's all consciousness, it's all projection.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So we had deceased dogs and cats a lot in our seances. And In our case, the people don't complain, but of course.
You mentioned the whole idea about it takes a lot of energy. Can you describe, like you said to me, when you come, you participate in this. Can you talk about the importance of the audience and the vibration in the room and what is necessary to get this to manifest?
Absolutely. This form of electromagnetic or psycho-emotional energy, the spirits claim there are electromagnetic compounds in our bodies which are facilitated for that goal, for that aim. So I need the people's admittance that they allow to have their energy play a part. Imagine, Grant, for example, most of the physical phenomena take part in the opposite curve of the circle. There is a tiny table on the floor. Usually we use a turned around bucket on which we put a few instruments and so forth. And when these things are then manipulated, to what grade they may be manipulated, but they have become manipulated, then it seems to be obvious that the sitters who sit much closer than the held medium on the other side of the circle, because these sitters suddenly feel that there is something like an energy drop they clearly feel, and the objects behave as if they are more in the control of the people who sit very close, as the objects would be behaving when they would be under the control of the medium. That's quite interesting to observe.
Wow. Walter, do you want to get into the DNA thing now?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. Kai, sometime back I sent you what would be a rough draft of an idea that Grant came up with, and that is the testing of DNA during trance and before trance. And originally this was done by J.Z. Knight. And J.Z. published the results of her 3 lab tests, but really didn't give any background or extensive background on how she went about collecting the DNA and what the protocols were and the
Absolutely.
like.
Absolutely.
And Grant came forward with the idea and said, you know, we'd like, let's see if we can't replicate this thing so that we can either say, well, Jay-Z may have not been as explicit in detail as we would like, but hey, we replicated it with Kai or another trance medium and found that there was a DNA change. In the case of J.Z. Knight, she actually, when she channels Ramtha, she actually shows a DNA change from male to female, or actually I should say from female to male, Ramtha being male. So what I proposed to Grant is that we have a really kind of a strict protocol, how we're going to collect it, how it gets sent to the labs, the anonymity that needs to be involved so that the labs don't have any clue as to whose DNA they're getting or why. And he's got my last paper on that, and we'll be shooting it out here pretty quickly, but we wanted to address this with you, not so much as asking if you will or will not participate, but let's wait until the final paper gets in your hands. But what your thoughts on it might be in terms of this drastic change in the most elemental part of us and our DNA between the trance state and the non-trance state.
Yeah. First of all, as you described it, we have very little data how, in which way or form these DNA material was collected. And the thing I was stumbling upon when you was writing to me, when you was writing that the result of the DNA would prove genuineness of the mediumship. And we can, with what result we would ever have, it would actually neither prove nor not prove anything, because even if that was rightly done with JZ Knight, it is not enough to create any form of a statistical. So it would be for the first time, because up to now we only believe that trance and consciousness is something spiritually, spirit or consciousness related, and has, okay, we know from multiple personality disorder, we know that the perception, I know that, for example, one personality needs glasses, the other personality does not need a glass. Now I heard of a case, in a multiple personality case, that one personality needed treatment of the liver, or one personality had diabetes and had to take insulin. The other personality did not. So what we already knew was that actually consciousness is creating reality. So it could be, of course, that there is an effect of, or onto the DNA scheme, let's call it that way. But you know, we cannot connect it to the question of genuineness.
Yeah.
That makes no sense, because we have no, you know, would there be 10,000 mediums who all made that change in DNA, we would have a statistical data pool. But there is only this case which is not clearly revealed to us. We have no idea where maybe that material was coming from, if it is not coming from JZ Knight. So the only thing we could do would be to have a free experimental approach and to say, let's look if there is anything maybe going on with the DNA, independent, and this would be then the start of actually something what one day would become a statistical background to claim this or to claim that. But after one JZ Knight example with unclear conditions, we cannot come from her to me. So we had to start, or not to start, I don't know if you may have other mediums, but if you overhand me a paper in which makes sense, I believe the spirit would be willing. It's not a big deal during the seance to come with a, you know what I mean?
Swab. Yeah.
Exactly. So I would be interested in the results as well, but there's no reason at all to be disappointed if there is maybe no change in. Maybe it is, and it would be sensational, because that would tell us that that personality who claims to be, yeah, but wait, he's a male, he's a European male. I mean, we have no data material, we have no DNA material of Hans Bender. Yeah, okay, but it would be a different DNA image.
Yeah, the markers would change.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the sex of the markers would change, but the markers themselves,
Yes.
and that's what we're looking for.
Yes.
But you hit the nail on the head. I don't think this is really a thing where we say, oh, gosh, you know, the DNA has changed. That's proof of physical mediumship, or proof that Kai is a physical medium. Like you said,
that's nonsense. That's nonsense, of course.
I think it's more about, let's get the data, and then those people, the geneticists and those people who have a better clue as to what might be going on, let them do it and let them see what they can come up with, and start the process of the investigation. I think, Grant, that's a better way of putting it. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that what you basically are going to sort of set is what Kai was talking about, this consciousness is primary. Whereas in the world today, they say DNA is primary. It's all DNA. It's just random. It's this sort of thing. And it sort of throws that whole idea that maybe consciousness has more to do with the physical world than it's being given credit for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, in the end, in the seance room, it is basically the spirit who has the control. But if we have a proper protocol, I cannot imagine that the transpersonality would not let it happen. So when I when I separate from my bioform and overgive it to this entity Hans, I cannot really interfere. But I believe even at that very moment, I already would have hints from him if he would not be willing. And I more feel the contrary. I more feel his scientific notion, his scientific interest in what may occur here. So the disturbance of the seance is minimal, right? It's only a minute when that needed to be done. So if there is a good protocol and a good paper written, and you send it then to me, and it is nicely worked out, I'm in.
Beautiful. I'm excited, and I appreciate you're doing this, because to me it's a big thing. It may work, it may not work, but if it does, it'll be revolutionary. And I really appreciate the fact that you would do this for, and to advance knowledge, whatever comes out. Well, I think we'll learn something from it.
Absolutely. I very much hope so. I mean, we definitely learn something from it. Even if nothing happens, we learn something from it.
Sure.
So
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, cool.
Okay, cool. So let's give you're coming to America. How often do you travel around the world all the time, or how much are you traveling?
No, not all the time. But we have some communities we are serving regularly. Some in Scandinavia and Australia very much, and the US a little bit. We had a big pause. Walter knows that since we came for the last time, more or less 5 years, we weren't coming. We are very much interested in steer a little bit more interest in this old country of parapsychology, Germany, actually. Yeah. We are very much working at that. But traveling is so exhausting. But on the other hand, we believe we have a mission. We really believe we have a mission, and that pushes us into the planes and pushes us into the trains, because we believe we have something at hand here that really enhances the understanding of the world and the expansion of consciousness. And therefore, we are doing everything we are doing in regards to what is called my mediumship, or this physical mediumship. So it's basically to serve others.
My final question is, and then I'll let Walter ask if he has something else. My final question is you sort of pointed out, physical mediumship at one point almost died completely out. That it almost was non-existent, and it was sort of revived. What do you see as the future of physical mediumship, the understanding of consciousness? Do you think we're making advances? And
oh yes, dear Grant, do you know what? Physical mediumship was never extincted, but there was the market was very swarmed by mental mediumship and that approach to prove an afterlife, and therefore the manifestative forms of mediumship were pushed to the side. Even the manifestative forms in the repertoire of many mediums. I know many mediums who said, I had that in my mediumship too, but it was not wanted. I was even ridiculed. or in the worst case, I was charged with fraud allegations or something.
Wow.
So 90% during a specific time, and we need to be aware that up into the 1980s in Brazil, for example, full form physical mediumship was alive and active. So in the UK, most of the physical mediumship groups have retreated into private environments, but there were very, very many of them, and they all worked in their secluded societies and secluded environments. Meanwhile, the market was only circling around mental mediumship, stage mediumships, mediums standing on the stage and saying, oh, I have a Joe, John, or James here. I believe it is coming from the left side. Yeah, you know how it is working. And this section of the market started to become more and more interested to have no competitors on the market, and they started to promote the idea that physical mediumship is extincted. They started to promote the idea that physical mediumship is nothing else but fraud. And even the most educational bodies of the spiritualistic scene promoted these lies because it was knowingly lies. Physical mediumship was never extincted. And if you read Robin Foy's first work, you read about this massive going-ons in relation to the Noah's Ark Society in the 1960s and 70s, what was a home circle connection over England. We are confronted with politics here, with politics inside of institutionalized spiritualism. And then something amazing was happening 1990 to 1996, the Skoll work and the Skoll report of the SPR. And that triggered such an interest everywhere in spiritual circles. And so many circles were motivated to work that way again. And it was amazing. And and what is the outlook? The outlook truly is amazing, dear Grant, because, and Walter, of course, as well. What do we have here? We have here a contemporary ceremonial environment, or we have a ceremonial environment. It is contemporary, and it is our own Western environment. So we don't have to go to India or whatnot. And what do we have here in our most own ceremonial environment is something very, very special. It's the Seance room environment, in which for the first time in a spiritual effort, not only the spiritual is in the center and transcending. No, we have an environment in which the material is tending to reveal its own spiritual nature itself. So it is a spiritual approach in which the spiritual is regarded, but the material as well. And this is a form of wholeness in spirituality, which is new. And I mentioned it in my short remarks in my first email. It is, why is it in our Western rituals that is happening? Because the material stands so very much in the focus of our lives. And it nearly has to be transcending in these supernatural related environment. And that could really give us a form of spirituality for a third millennium that has a lot of potential, don't you think?
Beautiful.
Does that sound good? Does that sound good and promising?
Yes, it does.
Well, you got anything to conclude with, Walter? Any more questions?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Kai, your physical mediumship has evolved into two styles. You have your what you call the initiation or the table tilting and turning mediumship, and then you have your materialization or what you call the cabinet mediumship. How did those two styles come about? What are the major differences between the two? And as a participant, what should we look to glean and to understand from those two separate styles?
Yes, yes. We want when the people come into our demonstrations, we want to give people a true insight into their own tradition. So at the one evening, we bring them into the situation the early American settler was around 1855 or something, sitting around the table and calling the spirits. And the dynamics that then break loose, we want to show to the people and want to teach them that is the very easy approach to the physical phenomena of the seance room. Because if you develop that further, table phenomena turn into seance room phenomena. And if you carry on to work with an experimental group or such, sooner or later, maybe you will develop a medium out of that group, because you detect that there is one person. When this person is there, the phenomena are the most strongest, and the circle turns from experimental into a development circle for a mediumship. So this is the first evening. Start at the beginning of the movement. Show these early and rudimentary dynamics that turned into physical mediumship environment. And on the next day, we show it from the exact opposite side of things. When a medium has nearly or has developed 37 years exclusively for physical, that is quite rare. And so you really have an experienced medium. And this is what we offer then the second day. And that's why the first day is called initiation. You shall be initiated into the tradition. You shall be initiated even into the group you are sitting in. You shall be initiated into the room, to the medium, to your own integration, because this is something many experience very powerfully. Many comes with anxieties, and I'm a little bit frightened. What will be going on, and will that be the environment I feel good? And the moment they sit down on their chairs, they feel fear turns into integration. Fear turns into bliss. And people start to feel as if they had done all their lives nothing else. So very much integrated they feel. So we want to have that feeling on integration already be done on the first day. That the second day we can start with initiated sitters, so to speak, to bring out the best out of the second evening. That's the plan, why initiation and cabinet are combined that way.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it. Thank you, Kai. I'm really looking forward to coming down and meeting you in person, and I have a much better understanding today of what's actually going to happen and the history. And I really appreciate what you've done. You've done it for a long time, and I'm indebted to you for the work you do. And I'm really looking forward to June in Florida. We'll see what happens. And I want to thank Walter as well for sort of bringing me into this, because this was not my field. I knew it was important, but I want to thank Walter as well for leading me along and sort of showing me what's important, what's not important, and where to go with this.
You're welcome. It's been a fun trip, hasn't it?
It has, and a very valuable trip. And so we'll leave it at that. And if you can get that photograph, I'll get Desta to stick it in there. It'll be pretty interesting because that, as Walter knows, I'm writing a book called Extraterrestrial or Maybe Not. And that's exactly what I'm looking at, is this whole idea of what are we actually looking at when we're looking at these paranormal phenomena. You know, is it...
I send it to your email immediately. In 2 minutes, you have it.
Okay.
That's great. Good.
Thank you very much. And thank you,
Thank you
Julia,
too.
for coming in. Thank you, Desta, for producing and taping.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kai.
Bye, guys.
Namaste.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.